Okay, thank you so much for joining us. Yes, once again, I would like to thank everybody for joining us on this live stream, a very special AMA Ask Me Anything with the man, the activist, the man of the hour himself, PJ Thum. Yes. So I guess while people are streaming in, and I think while questions are streaming in, let's just give a quick rundown. What's been going on right now? I mean, with this current, I know that there's been a lot of harassment leveled against yourself, leveled against New Naratif, but what is it in particular that they are finding fault with this time?
Okay, so this basically begins with last year's elections, and I think after the PAP suffered its big reverse in the July 2020 elections, after a few months, it started score settling against organizations which were effective in organizing against it.
Mm-hmm.
And in particular with media organizations which were effective in raising awareness about all the issues in Singapore, and New Naratif was one of them. So what happened in September 2020 was that the Elections Department filed a police report against New Naratif, stating that we had breached the Parliamentary Elections Act, specifically through unauthorized election advertising.
Mm-hmm.
So I was then called up for interrogation by the police, and I was interrogated for 4 hours on the 21st of September 2020. They then raided my home.
Mm-hmm.
They took my phone. They seized my laptop. And they have yet to return it. And that was that until today, where again I was called up and I spent another 3 hours at Clementi Police Station with the police.
All right. Okay. So, I mean, that just sounds like a giant mess, right? But I guess the question that's on everybody's mind, and it's on my mind, I don't really know this yet, but what happened today then? We know that it was 4 hours of questioning, of grilling. Your property was taken away from you for no rhyme or reason. What was it this time? What happened?
So with this time, the police actually called me up about a week and a half ago and asked me to come down.
Okay.
And then we went back and forth on the exact time, and we settled on today.
Mm-hmm.
And today I went down, and they had actually asked me, they had over the phone asked me to research certain things for them about New Naratif.
Wait. Sorry. Over the phone, they asked you to research things for them.
About New Naratif. Check your records was the exact phrase used.
Okay.
Yeah.
Check your records.
Check your records.
Okay.
So they gave me a list of things they wanted to know.
Okay.
Then they actually called me while I was in the middle of a bout of food poisoning. So I said, look, I can't write this down right now.
Mm-hmm.
Email it to me.
All
and
right.
they didn't want to email it to me, but eventually they emailed it to me.
Okay.
And it was all things which were not relevant to the police investigation.
Okay. Can you give us a sampling of what exactly they
Right.
were looking out for?
So to give you some context, right? The reason why calling me in for questioning is pointless
Mm-hmm.
is because under the law, the elections department gets to define election advertising as whatever it says it is.
Yes.
And intent is explicit in the law.
Mm-hmm.
Even if you intend to do something else with whatever you did, right,
Okay.
with your advertising,
Mm-hmm.
it doesn't matter. The elections department can still say, hey, that's illegal election advertising, and decide that you've broken the law. So what I did, want to do, intended to do, what New Naratif want to do, totally irrelevant.
Okay.
All the elections department has to do is say, that is election advertising, you broke the law, and that's it, right?
Okay.
And we never denied those are our posts.
Mm-hmm.
So there was never any need to call me in because all the evidence is online on Facebook,
Mm-hmm.
and we never denied that those are our posts.
Yeah.
So the fact they called me in the first time shows that it was a harassment and intimidation,
Mm-hmm.
and they didn't need to seize my laptop, seize my phone, right?
Yeah.
Completely unnecessary because all the evidence is online.
Yeah.
So now this second time, they sent me a list of questions,
Mhm.
and this list of questions is about who has control of our advertiser account, right? Who makes the decisions to post these, articles, and who makes the decision to boost the articles,
Okay.
right? Things like that,
Yeah.
right? And in general, and then specifically for each of the posts.
Mhm.
So I look at that and I'm like, this is pointless because the law explicitly states intent is meaningless with regards to the Parliamentary Elections Act, with regards to political advertising during the election.
Yeah. So it's definitely not for the purposes of the case at hand, because whatever you intended to do
makes no difference.
It makes
to the
no
law.
difference, right?
Yeah.
If they decide that it's contravened the law, then it's contravened the law.
Yeah.
So that, I think, links to a very interesting question or a very interesting insight that I've been sort of looking at, right? Which is that there is an idea that right now what they're trying to do is collect information to fuel a bill being passed that prevents against quote-unquote foreign intervention. So can you tell us more about that?
Oh, yeah, definitely. I think
Right, because it's got no purpose right now.
You've hit the nail right on the head.
Right, if
because
this whole
what I think too.
harassment, this
Yeah.
whole weird charade of investigation and collecting information is pointedly pointless, right? What is it for, right? And it seems like that is a pretty reasonable guess here. So can you tell us more about this foreign intervention bill that you think might be coming up?
Okay, so to backtrack a bit, right? This whole foreign intervention thing is something that are we frozen? Oh dear.
Oh. All right, and we are live again, and we're up. Yes, okay. So technical difficulties seem to have been solved, at least for the present moment. Thank you everybody for joining us. We'd like to invite all of you to ask any burning questions that you have about what is going on right now. How does this make any sense? What is going on with New Naratif? How PJ is doing? Yeah. Speaking of which, PJ, how are you doing actually? Yeah,
I'm tired, man. I'm really tired. Between the pandemic and the government, I don't know what's worse. I don't know if I want to head back to the UK where I have a home and a job, but it's dangerous in terms of pandemic being everywhere, or stay here where I am under, being harassed and attacked by my government at every turn.
All right, so you're just exposed to danger sort of wherever you turn here. All right, but anyway, for those of you just joining us, we are speaking to PJ Thum. He is the director of New Naratif, and he's under investigation for apparently violating the Parliamentary Elections Act for publishing unauthorized elections advertising. Right. So, PJ, can you tell us a little bit about this bizarre contravention that you seem to have been accused of? What did you do that warranted this?
Are we starting from the top? Because we'd answered that in the other video.
Yeah, so I don't... Should we go back to that? Maybe just a brief word about it. Okay, what basically happened?
So basically the elections department are accusing us of violating the Parliamentary Elections Act, and under the law, unauthorized election advertising is illegal during the elections. The problem with the law is that the elections department, which is not independent but part of the Prime Minister's office, can basically define election advertising to be anything it wants, and the law explicitly says that includes things which may not be intended as election advertising, which don't mention political candidates, which don't even come anywhere near politics. They can still say that's election advertising.
All right.
So it's problematic, obviously, because they can simply declare whatever they want to be election advertising, but they can use it to come after an organization like New Naratif by simply saying, aha, those posts you made are election advertising, and just declare it to be so, right? Which then shows how this is definitely harassment, because in which case they have absolutely no need to call me in for questioning at all. But now they've called me in for questioning twice, and the questions don't really have anything to do, especially the questions today don't have anything to do with the Parliamentary Elections Act. They were all about the internal structure and decision making and content creation processes of New Naratif.
Okay, so we're going to jump back to where we were just now, right? Which is trying to figure out exactly what the point of all of this is. So there's an idea out there, which is that all of this weird charade of investigation and researching deep into New Naratif is really just to fuel a bill quote unquote, preventing foreign intervention, right?
Yeah.
So can you tell us a little bit about that idea?
So, back in August 2019, our good old friend Minister K. Shanmugam, Lord Shan, he gave a speech where he talked about foreign intervention and the dangers of foreign intervention in Singapore, right? And then he specifically mentioned two media organizations which were suspect and which were obviously going to be targeted by this law.
Yeah.
And it's the Online Citizen Asia and it's New Naratif.
Okay. So we have a question coming in from the chat right now, which is, when and how has this law been used in the past?
The Parliamentary Elections Act?
I'm going to suppose that that's the one, yes. Has it been used in the past?
So, to my knowledge, the whole bit about elections advertising has not been used before, but I think it might have been used in the 70s and 80s to target the opposition, right? In that period in particular, the PAP was very aggressive at shutting down the opposition.
All right.
It opened up a bit, of course, after Lee Kuan Yew retired and Goh Chok Tong was Prime Minister. To my knowledge, in recent elections, it's not the Parliamentary Elections Act, the advertising clause which has been used to target activism and independent media and independent journalists, but cooling off day, right? Because anything that happens on cooling off day that can be, again, simply declared to be favoring a candidate or some sort of, because the law on cooling off day is very similar to the law on election advertising. Basically, whatever you say, the elections department can simply decide that it's a violation, file a police report, and next thing you know, people like Teo So Lang, like Roy Nung, they get their homes raided, they get their stuff confiscated, they go through this whole harassment and interrogation process from the police. And then in the meantime, as we've seen in the past, pro-PAP people who post on cooling off day, other people file a police report against them, but the police, nothing happens, let them off with a warning, etc. Right? So it's actually, the question is not really about the law, it's about how, the law is has a huge amount of discretion handed to the unelected officials in this case, right? Sometimes elected, but often unelected officials to simply decide what is right and what is wrong, right? And you see this pattern throughout all of these laws that governments make, Public Order Act, POFMA, and then the other problem, of course, is that it's not applied even-handedly. Yeah.
So thank you so much for the question and the amazing response, right? I want to invite everybody on the chat to please, right, send us your interesting questions. And it's an Ask Me Anything, so please don't hold back, right? I mean, PJ's been through one round of interrogation. What's one more? All right. So, but anyway, jokes aside, I think that there's a question that I want to ask, right? And it comes from my own personal experience, having been, through the SMRT protest, right? Which is, I think that there's a side to government harassment that I think people don't necessarily see unless they've been through it, and a side of emotional turmoil and burden which is unfairly placed on the individual, right? So can you share with us some of those emotional stresses, the mental health toll that this whole thing has taken on you, your loved ones, friends, and family?
Okay, so I think to answer that, you need to understand, right, the broader circumstances in Singapore, where Singaporeans fundamentally we lack basic rights that people in other countries, including countries around us, Malaysia, Indonesia, the Philippines, citizens there actually have more rights than Singaporeans, especially in terms of basic, the fundamental protections for human liberty, and avoiding, unreasonable arrest and harassment from security services like the police, right? In Singapore, because of the way laws are worded, the way the PAP has changed the laws, has eroded our protections. For example, when you go in for questioning, you don't get to have a lawyer with you. You're not allowed to have access to a lawyer until after you are charged, and even then, they can withhold access to a lawyer until a reasonable amount of time. And that reasonable time has never been capped, right? They've denied people access to a lawyer for as long as 28 days, but there's never been an official cap put on what is reasonable. So you don't have this, what is a very basic fundamental right in other countries, to have a lawyer. But you also have to think about the broader context Singapore, where it's assumed that you have a sort of omniscient government which knows so much about you and is happy to use that information to destroy you, right? They have surveillance all over the place. You use your IC number to access all sorts of government services. So the moment you know the government's coming after you, you realize just how much information they have about you and your life, and how they could use all of that to destroy you. And a lot of the time they do that to activists because they already make our lives so difficult. You know, I've been very vocal about how I am blacklisted from working in Singapore, right? And you won't find that on paper anywhere. It's phone calls from a minister to NUS, right? And next thing you know, I can't be hired at any university. So things like that, right? So that's the kind of power that the government has. Then you add to that the power that the security services have. And you realize that once you walk into that police station, you actually have very few rights. You have very little protection. And they can do whatever they want to you. And you then realize, you're actually putting yourself in a very vulnerable, risky position. And they could literally do almost anything. And how would you stop them? And so you end up getting very anxious and nervous and worried about this. And of course, you don't know what questions they're going to throw at you. You don't know what's going to happen to you in there. And it's, I have to say, it's very, very stressful. And it's very, very unfair when you don't have anyone in your corner to help you, during the whole process, right? The moment you go in there, you're alone.
Okay.
Vulnerable.
So we've got a question just coming in, and I want to kind of just shoot that your way, PJ. And that's, why did you bother to assist with the investigations if you could maintain your right to silence throughout? Prosecution has the sole obligation and resources to build their case.
Because it's illegal not to assist the police in their investigation.
Okay, so there's no right to silence.
So you have to go in there and answer those questions, right? If you don't go in there, then you're breaking the law.
All right.
So you have to go in.
Okay.
But if you go in there and they ask you a question and you decline to reply, you say no comment, that's totally legal. You can do that. And there is still a provision in the law that gives you the right not to self-incriminate. The problem is that if they decide to charge you, usually what happens, and there's plenty of precedent in Singapore's legal cases for this, is that if you decline to reply, if you say no comment, they will argue that is a form of self-incrimination, basically. Now, lawyers are going to explain this in more detail than me, but basically silence is seen as implying very much guilt, from what I understand. Yeah. Right? So that's one aspect, right? So you have to go in there, you have to answer the questions, you don't have to give them any information, you can decline to comment.
Okay, so I want to just shoot off another question here, which is, I've always been curious, are the police cordial, aggressive, biased, unbiased, etc., when they are doing their job with regard to politically motivated cases? How was it? Yeah, because you've gone through a few rounds of it, right?
Oh, so have you.
I went through once. Luckily for me, I just had once. But what about? Okay, let's hear from you first. You're the man of the hour.
Okay, I mean,
how were the police?
Okay, so I only have my own experience, right? Maybe you can talk about your experience after that. But with me, they were cordial.
Okay,
that's how I would put it. And I think it depended on the different officers. The first time I went in, the sort of head of the entire department came down and spoke to me personally, and he said, "Look, Dr. Thum, no, actually, I think call me Mr. Thum. We could have handled this differently. But instead, we invited you here to speak to us, to answer questions. We have not taken away your phone. They hadn't at that point. It was before the questions. You know, and so he says, you can see how we are choosing to handle this. A police report has been filed, and we are obligated to investigate. No, they're not, by the way, but you know. And so this is how we're choosing to handle it, and I hope you understand. You know, so that sort of thing, right?
Okay.
So that is sort of in some ways you could read it both ways. They're signaling to me, hey, we know this is a political case. We are going to do what we have to do, and you do what you have to do, and we'll get this over with quickly, right? It wasn't quickly. But the flip side of that is you could also read that as him saying, look, cooperate, or this could be so much worse. And it's impossible for me to say what message he was sending, right? But the investigating officer who interviewed me, now his boss, right, who was overall in charge of the case, seemed very anxious that this would not become you know, a problem for him. Okay, but I interacted with him very little, so I don't know. Now the investigating officer, so I interact at 3 levels: head of the whole, you know, police station, whatever, the investigating officer, the head investigator, and the guy who interviewed me. The guy who interviewed me was very nice, very polite, very professional. I, of course, don't know him well enough to say exactly what he was thinking, but I would hazard that he also didn't think that this was a serious case. He understood that it was a political case, and I would hazard that he behaved accordingly. But of course, what I can only say is he behaved very professionally and did what he needed to do.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's more or less my experience similar as well, right? In that it's really the bureaucracy of the machine that gets you, and not the individuals themselves. I'm sure they're just wonderful human beings and Singaporeans in their own right? But yeah, it's the state machinery. So I mean, my thing was when I went in, you know, the officer just asked, you know, did you commit vandalism? And I said no. And he was like, I mean, did any of the participants put pieces of paper on the trains? And I was like, yes. So you did commit vandalism? No, I didn't. That's not vandalism. You know what I'm saying? So we're speaking a different language, and you know, it's understandable to a certain degree, but at the same time, yes, I think even if you get a nice police officer who's really you know, just trying to relate to another human being and do his job, do their job, it's the state machinery that still gets you.
I should quote, of course, Lim Chin Siong, quite famously, who said, "Don't pa mata. They are wage earners too. They are also people. And when the time comes for us to rise up against the British colonialists and vote them out, we want the police on our side." So same thing, you know, 60 years later, I don't hold it against the individuals who are doing their jobs. I hold accountable the political leaders who have created this really ridiculous situation, this oppressive situation. The people who sit in the cabinet are the ones who have created all these laws, who have created this environment of fear. They're the ones we need to hold accountable. So I want to take some time out to thank everybody for joining in, tuning in, watching the stream, and especially for asking the wonderful questions that are coming in. Please keep them rolling, and we're going to try and get to every single one of them as quickly as we can, all right? So the next question coming up is, even if our ridiculous laws are even-handedly applied, for example, in the case of Louis Ng, MP Louis Ng, such enforcement of laws necessarily serves to strike fear into the people and discourage people from speaking up about issues that matter. 100% agree here. So eventually creates a system of fear and a culture of not speaking out because of repercussions. What can be done to address this? Yeah. Well, this is the broader problem in Singapore, right? That there is so much fear, and the only way to really combat that is to collectively organize to push back and fight and stand up for our rights. We need to know that we're not alone, and this is what New Naratif is trying to do, to create a platform where people can learn about democracy and learn about collective organization and work together. The best thing, probably the strongest thing that helped me and would help anyone who wants to stand up is to know you're not alone,
Mm-hmm.
to know that you're working together. And, at this point, I have to really thank my colleagues at New Narrative. They are amazing. They did a fantastic job standing up for me today, and they really had my back.
Mm-hmm.
They, ran this whole campaign while I was in the police station, and it really helps.
Mm-hmm.
So when you look at, things happening in civil society, activists turn up for other activists, right?
Mm-hmm.
And a whole bunch of activists showed up today, including yourself. Thank you for being there, to wish me well before I went in. And many people waited until I came out, right? And they would do things like, ask the desk officer what's going on with me every hour, make sure that there was pressure, make sure that I knew that I wasn't alone.
Mm-hmm.
So I think the number one thing is to work collectively together.
Mm-hmm.
Don't let our system atomize you and isolate you. Find other people whom you want to work with, and slowly build trust and take collective action
Mm-hmm.
to create change. And it
Mhm.
can be, very small, but eventually you have to remember, right? We outnumber them. The people in power, there's very few of them.
Mm-hmm.
And honestly, this being Singapore, it's like 3, 4, 5 people who truly have the ability to really create massive change in Singapore, who really hold all the power in their hands.
Mm-hmm.
There's millions of us, and if we can just work together and stick together, we can create great change. So that's the answer: collective action.
Mm-hmm. I also want to add in that you can help out in your own way by liking and commenting and sharing posts. Right, I sound like a YouTuber, but basically keeping this story from fading out of the news cycle, keeping Singaporeans from not slowly falling into apathy, driving this up, right? Using the hashtag I'm with PJ Thum, right? That affects the algorithms, that affects what people see and how prioritized the story is on the various social media algorithms. So that's something that we can all do. Hashtag I'm with PJ Thum. All right.
I also want to add combat misinformation. There's a lot of misinformation out there. And there's a lot of things that people don't realize about laws, about how our system works. Again, that's what New Narrative is trying to do.
Mm-hmm.
Watch my videos, share my videos. And if you can, please do join New Narrative as a member, because we rely entirely on membership revenue, membership subscriptions and donations. So join as a member and be part of this process that we're trying to build.
Mm-hmm. So I'm going to shoot you another question here, which is, are there any laws or obligations that items taken by the police have to be returned within a certain period of time?
No.
Just not at all.
No, as far as I know, no. It is very problematic, because basically they can do whatever they want, pretty much, for all intents and purposes, if they can have some sort of reasonable justification for what they're doing.
Yeah.
Right? So they can take whatever they want if they simply say, I suspect that it contributes to the case in some way, and then hold on to it till the end of the case. And that's what they do to us, right? They suspect that, there's something on a laptop. They hold the laptop for a year, 18 months. They return the laptop to you so long as the laptop was returned broken. And and they didn't pay for it, and they pressured her to sign a statement saying it wasn't broken when it came back. You can ask her. She may even be in the audience. But, that's what they do, right? And then at the end of it, they close the case, they give you a warning, they say, hey, we didn't charge you, what are you complaining about? But it's the 18 months, right, where they took all your stuff, your books, your papers, your phone, your laptop, and then held on to it and just made your life difficult that way by calling you in for repeated investigations, right? And then at the end, they don't charge you and they say, look, what? Justice has been done. You weren't charged. So that's, Sean was, hit the nail on the head when he said it's the bureaucracy which grinds you down. That's how they get you.
Yeah. And I mean, I got to say, when one of the things that I was most afraid of when this happened to me was my work is on my laptop. Like, this is my life, if you just take it away, that's so much data, there's so much work that's lost. But well, yes, short answer to that question, there's absolutely no guarantee or protection that your items will be returned, and even when they are, they may be broken. Okay, so anyway, next question coming in: to what extent did you anticipate the government's response when you founded New Narrative, and have there been anything that has helped you mentally, emotionally and physically prepare for the government's response?
Oh yes, so when I founded New Narrative, I definitely anticipated that there would be a very strong response, and I was mentally prepared to, you know, weather it. The thing, of course, is intellectually knowing something and actually living through it are two very different things. So I think that there is nothing that can truly prepare you for it. Like truly make you 100% sort of fireproof, right? But you can prepare for it in a sense that you can, especially if you work collectively with people, understand what's going to happen, know what rights you do have and what rights you don't have, know how the process is, right? So activists have developed all sorts of standard procedures when it comes to these things. And I followed those standard procedures, right? And so it saved me a lot of hassle, a lot of difficulty. So again, right, if you want to do this sort of thing, I strongly urge you, if you just want to stand up for your basic rights, do so collectively. Find other people who are doing it, understand the issues, and just approach any of us. Approach me. I'm right here. Ask me a question, anytime, right? Come to our New Narrative events and we'll happily talk to you and explain to you. And then once you have that, it makes it a lot easier.
So
and the other thing I'd recommend is therapy.
Okay.
Therapy. Everyone should go for therapy. It's very important.
Fully support that message right there. But I think jumping off of that question, right? Just a short statement will do. But I mean, when you woke up this morning knowing, okay, I'm gonna have to walk into the bureaucratic state machine that is out to crush me, was there a thought that you had, a little morning ritual that you did to kind of brace yourself going in? Or was it? It
wasn't this morning. It was the whole previous couple of days. All the things that we did to prepare, all the things that my colleagues did. For example, one of the things that we learned in Singapore is because the Singapore government really cherishes its international reputation, the more you make yourself a case internationally and have international allies and risk their reputation, the more they hate it and the more that constrains their behavior. Of course, ultimately they can do whatever they want, right? Sovereign government and all that. But there are things which you can do to fight back, push back, protect yourself. And you need to understand that. And that's why allies are so important, not just in Singapore, but globally.
Okay. So we've got another question coming in here, which is, what is the future of free speech in Singapore? And what can the layman do to support freedom of speech and let the government know that they can't take away our rights just like that?
I think that's an interesting question. I think we are going to see a lot more attacks. Now, coming back to this whole law against foreign interference, what is very clear, it's not a law against foreign interference, it's a law against specific kinds of speech that the government doesn't like, right? Because foreign interference is such a vague and amorphous term. And the biggest form of foreign interference is foreign direct investment. Is the government going to stop that?
Yeah.
No. I mean, foreign investment? No. They want us to bend over backwards to cater to foreigners, right? That's
I have to point out also that they're inviting somebody from America, a transphobe and a homophobe, to tell us about trans issues in Singapore. So, well, that makes absolutely no sense. But I guess your prediction on the future of free speech in Singapore is that they're going to continue attacking independent journalists like yourself. It's begun with New Narrative. Who knows how much further it's going to continue going.
Way back, right?
But what can the layperson do to combat this?
I think again, it's about collective action, about looking for good, reliable sources of information. And I hope New Narrative is one of them, because we work very hard on making sure all our work is evidence-based, and sharing it and getting together people to discuss it and pushing back against attempts by the government to monopolize the narrative, but also publicizing and supporting people who are trying to stand up for your rights, right? And whether or not you agree with it, you have to stand up for Jolovan. You have to stand up for all the people who are trying to fight for a better Singapore. And it could be as simple as making a donation to one of the many organizations like Marua, who are trying to make a difference. Support the online citizen. I mean, really, the online Terry is amazing. We really do need to make sure that the online citizen survives. And unlike New Naratif, we are based in KL, right? If they shut us down here, I'm just going to keep reporting from over the border or whatever, wherever I end up. Terry is here and he's vulnerable. So support the online citizen, support the people who are trying to preserve your freedom of expression, and don't be afraid. Ultimately, what can they do to you when you outnumber them? Collective action.
So speaking of freedom of expression, we'd just like to say that this is a big expression of our freedom of speech, right? And we'd like to encourage all of our viewers to continue sending us your very thought-provoking and very interesting questions. All right. So we're going to take another question now, which is, for both the times that you were called to the police, were you charged? Did you know who initiated these charges? And how does one even find out who initiates the charges being filed against you? Let's take that bit by bit. I guess first, were you ever charged?
No, I haven't been charged.
Okay.
And you have to understand, charging actually changes the state of affairs, right? If the police are investigating, basically they can do whatever they want to you because you don't have a lawyer and you lack legal protections. But if they decide to charge you, then you actually have crossed the threshold where you're supposed to start having legal protections, and it makes their life more difficult, and it makes your life more difficult, obviously. But it also starts down a path which, especially for a political case, is commits people to a certain course of action. So it's actually unlikely that you get charged, especially for a political case.
Which is a kind of convenient little loophole, right? Because they could just levy whatever attacks or harassment they want on you and just be like, oh, with our investigation, we're not going to charge you. Nothing's going to happen, right? And it never goes on the books.
Just to answer the other thing, right? Who initiated the charges? I mean, we know that the police report was filed by the Elections Department, part of the Prime Minister's office, but ultimately it's the Attorney General's office which decides whether to charge you. And if the Attorney General's office made very clear at the beginning. So again, right, this shows how stupid all of this is, because if they make clear at the beginning, hey, we're not going to charge you, the police wouldn't bother investigating. And if they had made clear also, yes, right, the ELD says this is excuse me, unauthorized election advertising, so yes, let's charge him straight away. That would also have been clear cut. So the fact that there are 2 rounds of interrogation clearly shows that is deliberate, right? Because of the way the law works, because of the way the Attorney General's office, the chambers works, because of the way the police work. It's quite clear they should have either charged me or dropped this case a long time ago. They could have done that the day the ELD filed the police report. But instead, they've dragged it out months and months now.
All right. So another question here, which I like very much, is from a university student, right? So as a university student studying in a Singaporean local university, how can I get my faculty, teaching and research staff to be more politically engaged? They hold so much knowledge, but they are not budging as much as I'd hoped for. And yeah, I have to say, I personally resonate with this question because, I was raised on this diet of like people like Cornel West, right, or academia that would stand in solidarity with individuals who are coming out and saying things or who are being unfairly persecuted by the government. We just don't see that in Singapore as much, right? So yeah, I guess the question is how can we get faculty to care more, to be more politically engaged, right?
Well, I mean, look at me, right? All I did was start publishing. This was even before I became an activist. All I did was publish my work, and the government didn't like it. And next thing you know, I'm blacklisted. And from their point of view, right? If they're a foreigner, obviously that means they can very easily lose their employment pass, lose their livelihood, and they're well paid. And why would they risk that? And we've seen people who are even PRs, right? People who lived here their whole lives lose their positions and be forced to leave because of minor activism. People that I'm sure pretty much no one in this chat will ever heard of. Philip Holden, for example, right? Loves Singapore. And, should have, contributed so much to our cultural scene. And now he's, I can't even remember where he is now, So, and if they're Singaporean, you have to consider, again, the way that our whole neoliberal capitalist system works. As I've explained in the video, you're loaded down with debt, right? Debt to buy a home in particular, debt to buy a car, debt to support your family. And then you're well paid and you are at the university. Are you going to risk that? So it's very, very hard for people in that position who have families and jobs and a huge mountain of debt, mortgages, right, car payments, education, children's schools, all of that to pay. So I think, and of course you've seen, you look at the number of academics who've been forced to leave over the years. Pretty much a who's who of anyone who's ever overtly tried to take a different view, not even an anti-PAP view, right? But people like Cherry and George and Donald Low, who are by no means anywhere near as radical as as we'd like, and nowhere near as radical as I've been, right? And they've been forced out. Anyone who wants to have a different view has been forced out. So I think the best you can hope for when it comes to answer this question, is really about trying to get these professors to think about things differently, to maybe help you organize, discover different resources, right? If they're willing to, if they're not, they're not, but also try to help you, give you some cover for your activities as a student. It's very important as a student to use that time to learn and grow and try different things, but it also helps very much if you have a faculty ally who's willing to give you cover or help you navigate through the system. So think about how you can work with them rather than asking them to conform to the way that you want change to happen, right? You create your change, but other people, because they have different incentive structures around them which make their life very difficult, think about how they can help within the constraints of their position.
I love that answer. Yeah, basically, to the faculty, to the research staff, try and find some way into civil society, find some way into the student groups. And there are tons of student groups that are coming up right now. We just spoke to Loon. We spoke to many student activists. The university scene in Singapore is really bubbling with new ideas, bubbling with very progressive ideas. So yes, faculty, come on, let's get on it. All right. Okay. So anyway, the next question coming in is actually a question that I'm quite curious in. It's a personal question for you, which is, if you were to distill it to a few names, who would you say ignited your initial steps into the journey of activism?
Oh, well, I think it's for activism. I think as a historian, so there's a bunch of names that helped me become a historian.
Okay.
But then I learned about historians who are also activists, and I realized it is the responsibility of a historian to use that knowledge to make the world better. Right?
Could we get one big name here?
Oh, sure. Crap, suddenly I'm blanking. What's his name?
Fanon?
Fanon's good. History of the United States. People's History of the United States. Sorry, long day, everyone.
Yes.
I'm sure someone in the chat will remember. Wait, people's.
And this is sort of on a personal note. This is some
Howard Zinn.
All right.
Howard Zinn, yes. Howard Zinn.
And so this is personally while you were in university. This is the person that got you into history as activism.
Yeah.
Okay.
Very much so. Emulating his model, right? So he was he wrote a radically different history of the US by telling, the first chapter is brilliant. It tells the story from the perspective of the Native Americans who were tortured, raped, oppressed, enslaved, beaten. And the story becomes so different. And you understand why Columbus is actually an arch colonialist and villain in our history, in our global history, right? Because he helped pioneer and justify the rape and torture of indigenous people all over the world because of his myth. So Howard Zinn, definitely. But also activists who, were not historians, but other activists. And as an athlete, I think I grew up, my father brought me up very much on the legend of Muhammad Ali and how an athlete can make a very big difference, right? And so he was very important to know that you're willing to give up everything, the thing that mattered most to him in life, his boxing career, the thing that defined him. He was willing to give it all up based on principle. That was very important. And then, of course, I've always talked about my faith, right? Being a Methodist, the story of Jesus, the original bearded socialist, lefty, radical, right? Who fought the government and, ended up changing the world. And I think in Singapore, Chin Siong, right? Lim Chin Siong, hugely inspiring when you read his work. And I really hope to get his writing in front of more people because, it's on my list of books that I'm writing, but a book that sort of collects all his writing, all his speeches into one. He's actually hugely inspiring when you look at what he accomplished and the things he talked about.
I like the intergenerational overlap here because Lim Chin Siong and the book Comet in Our Sky was one of the books that got me really interested in activism, Singapore activism, right? I think for a lot of young people getting into US global politics, looking at Brexit, looking at Black Lives Matter, that's all very appealing, right? But that was the book that really drove it home, that Singapore was a place worth fighting for and that people had fought for and given their lives for. But
and this sort of broader international context, right? Because in Singapore we hear about people from abroad, right? We read about, say, Gandhi. We read about Sun Yat-sen and glorify him, or the heroes of the Chinese Revolution, or we hear about Martin Luther King. And the thing is, Chin Siong was their contemporary. We talk about Fanon, right? We talk about Jomo Kenyatta, the heroes of African revolution, African anti-colonialism. Chin Siong was their contemporary. Nehru, Chin Siong was recognized alongside them as a hero, as an anti-colonial, and his life and his death were mourned by all of them as well. So we have our own heroes. It's just that it's been suppressed by the government. But to look at Chin Siong and understand how he was not just this one Singaporean, but part of a global, great, radical, left-wing, anti-colonial tradition, right? To free and liberate people and give them self-determination and know that we have it in our past as well. It's hugely inspiring.
So speaking about international effects, right, we have a question here coming in, which is ultimately Singapore profits from what China is doing to Hong Kong. And there are cases like this which capture the international attention, and it can raise red flags which affect which companies and corporations decide to locate themselves here. So what do you think is the impact of international recognition, of international condemnation of human rights abuses in Singapore? I think there's a cynical point of view which would go along and say, the international scene can cry about it as much as they want and they can flag it to whatever institution they want, but it's not going to change anything here. So what do you think about the international response and condemnation to human rights abuses?
You're saying the cynical view is it's not going to change anything?
Yeah, they're all overseas.
Seems to say
and
that maybe they won't locate themselves here.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure whether this question is advocating for or against what.
But I think regardless. So what do you see as the effect of international repudiation or condemnation of human rights abuses, whether that be economic or social or political?
Look, I think first of all it's really important, that we need to break out of this whole national international. It's just humanity. We're all human beings. Where you're born, where you grow up, right? You can't choose where you're born, first of all, and where you grow up, which side of a border you end up on. It's a matter of luck. There are basic international human rights that apply to all human beings, and every single country in the UN is part of the International Convention of Human Rights. So we, even if you say sovereignty, well, our government is a signatory to that convention, right? We have a responsibility to live up to the conventions that we are a part of, that we accede to. Convention of Human Rights is one of them. So we recognize basic human rights. We recognize social cultural rights. So that's the first thing. I think we need to break out of this whole, here and there. Look, when it comes to human rights are universal. Okay? And I don't agree with people who put a price tag on it. Because I don't know what the point of our human society is if you're going to be so cynical and say, human rights, but trade it off for, for more money, right? For greater income. I mean, there is a certain sort of, it's a very sort of destructive, cynical idea to think that you can trade human rights for, I don't know, greater income. It's not, first of all, it doesn't work that way, right? You can have human rights and be a high income country. There's plenty of, countries around the world, including now in Asia, right? South Korea, Japan, Taiwan, right? They're doing a much better job than we are, and they're all wealthy countries. But if you're willing to sell off your humanity for a bit more money, that's a slippery slope, because the other end of that slope where you're going to is colonialism, right? It's slavery. And we don't want to. That's the whole point of our society. We're trying to raise ourselves above that. So I'm not sure exactly what this person trying to answer this question, but I think that it's very destructive to think about our world in terms of nation states, and that's how capitalists and nationalists, right, ethno-nationalists who've been trying to manipulate us, have been trying to manipulate us by creating this idea that people in different nation states are different. When we're not, we're all human beings. And they're, trying to turn us against each other. The same way ethno-nationalists turn people of the same class who should have shared class solidarity against each other by saying, just because you're Chinese and you're Malay and you're Indian, you should oppose each other, when actually it's the capitalists who are exploiting us, who are making our lives miserable, right? It's the authoritarian dictators, it's people like the PAP government and what they're trying to do to us. That's who we should be opposing together, not fighting with each other.
All right. So the next question coming in is a very practical question here, which is, if the legal battle continues, what is the likelihood that lawyers, I'm guessing Singaporean lawyers, would want to take the case?
Oh, lawyers will love, I have lawyers. I've got plenty of lawyers. All the activists have plenty of lawyers. There's a core group of Singaporean lawyers who take and happily fight all these cases. Just look at the whole 377A constitutional challenge. You can see the whole spectrum of lawyers, right? Chu Cheng Si, Eugene Thurasingam, M. Ravi, right? They're all there. Peter Low, they're all there, right? So they'll happily help you. So one of the great things about Singapore is, because of how we're set up, right? Lawyers actually have a lot of power to influence the system in very specific ways. And we have a core group of very dedicated lawyers who are very keen to do everything they can to fight. So I think I want to thank all these lawyers, because I've worked with all of these lawyers in different cases before, and more lawyers whom I don't know if I can mention, but they're all fantastic, wonderful people who've worked very hard to help people in a lot of ways, and they do it pro bono.
All right. So next question coming in is, do you see Critical Spectator?
Oh my God.
Okay. Everybody take a breath. All right. Do you see Critical Spectator, a Polish national, as someone who is foreign interference, posting anti-left views, or is he also a key part of the fabric, writing about Singapore, and therefore acceptable? I sort of get the questions here. So is Critical Spectator foreign interference, something that we should condemn and try and exercise from the political scene in Singapore? Or, as much as we disagree with their views, we should still welcome them into the agora of thought, into the discussion that we have about local politics?
Okay, so I think there's a very interesting discussion here, right?
I'm quite unsettled on this because, I would sort of like him gone, but, but then I know that there are serious problems to saying I'd like that person gone. So what do you think about this?
My principle is you, we tolerate people who are also who also accept the principle of tolerance, right? So if you are an intolerant person, that disqualifies you from the right of tolerance, because this is something that intolerant people love to do. You criticize them and they immediately say, aha, you're betraying your principles, you're a hypocrite because you're not tolerating me. And I think it's for me an important principle that the people who practice tolerance are the people who deserve tolerance. If you're intolerant, you don't deserve tolerance, right? So that's one principle, and of course this is not black and white. It's shades of gray. How tolerant you are, how much are you willing to engage, how much are you open, right? And that's one factor, right? What kind of person are you tolerant? And another thing is transparency, right? So New Naratif is trying to model good behavior, by being very transparent about our money and how we spend it and what we do with it and what our agenda is, right? So is he transparent? Honestly, I really don't know much about him. The thing that always bothers me with Michael Petraeus is he has a Greek name. Why does a Polish national have a Greek name? Right? Because if he was born in Poland, he'd have a Polish name, even if he was an immigrant or something, right? It would be spelt in a Polish. Why does he have a Greek? Petraeus is Greek for rock, right? It comes from the Greek for rock. Same root as Peter, right? So, what Petraeus is a Greek name. So how is he Polish? That's what actually I'm curious about. So is he transparent about his funding, his money, what he's trying to achieve? Is he tolerant? Does he obey the laws? Is he open to discussion, criticism? Is he willing to engage? These are all things we need to consider. As for him specifically, I don't think I know enough about him to comment about him specifically.
Okay.
Yeah.
So on that note, let's move on here to a very, very contentious question here, but I'd like to just shoot it your way and then hear what you have to say here. Okay. So could you speak more about the benefits, right? And that refers to the social, economic, and decolonial realms of ReEmerging with Malaysia. So this is sort of a hot topic, which right-wing pundits use to kind of pin this traitor label on you. So yeah.
I never understood that. The one thing where I really agree with Lee Kuan Yew is also evidence of me being a traitor. So me not agreeing with Lee Kuan Yew, I'm a traitor. But in this one thing, I really agree with Lee Kuan Yew, and I'm also a traitor. So it makes me suspect that they just want to call me a traitor. It's really not about my views.
That was something that he cried on national television when he couldn't get that, right? Well, okay, but in any case, what are the key benefits though, social, economic, or decolonial of ReEmerging?
Okay, so I think again, right, you think about the principles, it's not about Malaysia per se. It's about how do we create a political structure that will protect and preserve the fundamental rights of the people in that political structure and create human and treat people in it with the dignity that they deserve, the dignity and respect, right? Human dignity, human respect that they deserve. That for me is the question. Now, we have ended up in this world where there is this myth of the nation state, and that every state also has a certain nation within it. And somehow, if you're of the Singaporean nation, you're different from people of the Malaysian nation, when those are fictitious constructs that were created because of a political, not so much accident, but selfishness in 1965, right? And so when I look at Malaysia, one of the things I wonder is, would the people in both sides be better off if Singapore was part of Malaysia again? And for me, the answer is yes. And I can get to that in a second, right? But is that the best possible political unit in which to protect people's human rights? and dignity and happiness, both economic and social, cultural happiness, self-determination. I don't think so. I think we can do better. But we're not really in a world where we can easily redraw lines on the ground. So re-merging of Malaysia for me is probably an easy way of progress, right? So when it comes to Malaysia, again, it's sort of several things. One is about creating a country which is a lot more balanced in terms of different identities, right? Which has a lot more balance in terms of stronger economic and broader economic base. I don't want to spend too much time on this. So I think how I'd summarize it is if you think about socialism being a fundamental view that we are stronger through collective action, right? The bigger the country then, the more we can take collective action and the more we can create resources to help the people within that country who are less well off, and the more we can work together to create change both internally and globally. Put it that way.
Yeah.
Right? So I think Singapore would be better off as part of a bigger entity. And, if we want to join Indonesia, I'm also not opposed to it, right? The fundamental thing for me is are we going into a country where we have equal rights, equal self-determination, where we can then create a country which fights for the rights of people, creates, human dignity and respect, right? And what that could be, whether that's Malaysia, Indonesia, Mafelindo, right? Or Southeast Asia reunited into one whole, I think the bigger the better, honestly. And I think all humanity should be in the same country, but of course that's kind of utopian. I don't know if we'll ever get there. But we do really need to break this idea of nation and state. They're two different things. One is imagined and one is, negotiated, and they're not the same.
Okay.
Yeah.
So on that note, I want to just say that it's approaching an hour and we should be wrapping up. So I want to just ask everybody to put in any last burning questions that you have into the chat. We can take maybe a few more. And then on that note, also, I want to thank everybody for their wonderful, very thought-provoking, very insightful questions. And as we wait for any last few questions to trickle in, I think I have one burning question that I want to ask, right? Which is that... I think it's very easy for us coming into this situation, right? Looking at you as an individual in the news, and forget that you are a human being, right? And you are a human being, you are a friend, you're a brother, you're a family member, right? You are a human being with human emotions, right? And you are a human being that is being crushed and being abused and harassed by the state, right? And I just want to sort of understand on a personal and emotional level, what has been the cost to you, your friends, your family?
Yeah, it's tough, man. I think.
I mean, you've been strong throughout this, but I mean,
yeah,
I know that this is some heavy stuff. So,
I think when you get abused a lot, it leaves deep emotional scars on you that extract a heavy toll because you have to cope with and live with those scars, right? It's exhausting, it's mentally exhausting, it's physically exhausting. It's definitely affected me, my work, how I relate to other people, and here I have to really thank my family, my wife, my son, my mother, for their support. Their unwavering support for what I do. I've seen the toll it's taken on my mother, and I know how scared she is, but she has never wavered and never said, you should do something else or whatever, right? She knows I'm doing the right thing, and she's tried to help me in every single way she can. But I can't deny how exhausting it is to not just be subject to so much abuse, but then to be constantly reminded of that abuse. And this is something I've spent a lot of time talking to my therapist about, because it's one thing to experience something horrific. it's another thing to constantly experience it over and over again, because you have to constantly see the circumstances and entity which created that abuse every day, right? And often, and as part of my work even. So it has taken a huge emotional toll. And I mean, she actually said to me, "I don't know how you're functional, PJ." I was like, what do you mean? You just got to do it. I mean, what do you do? Not do it? And she's like, that is an option, PJ.
I mean, that's sweet. But I mean, I can't imagine, sort of what you're going through, because you see yourself on news articles, you see yourself on TV. It's slanted in a certain way. You see comments online. Yeah, I don't know how you do it.
I
but
still can't get over, like, was it September last year, when the select committee, 2019, September 2019, front page of the Straits Times compares me as a threat to Russian disinformation campaigns. The historian who lied, Russia turning societies against each other. These are the threats that the Straits Times identified as being existential threats to Singapore. It's like, what on earth are you even, who on earth even approved, had this idea to put those two things on the front page next to each other in a list of two things that was the most dangerous threats that Singapore faced.
I mean, we can laugh about it. We can say it's absurd, right? But I think when you've worked this hard, you've earned your degrees. You've earned the respect of the academic community. You back up everything you say, and then this is the bullshit. I'm just gonna say it. This is the bullshit that you're met with, right? Other academics don't have to deal with this stuff. People who work this hard are typically rewarded and celebrated and looked up to for this work. So I think the main point I want to say here is, it's easy, I think, to sort of look at you as a public figure and forget that you're a human being, and forget that it's a real human being who's being crushed by the machine, not a public figure.
Thanks.
Yeah.
I just want to add, I don't want to devalue the work that other academics do. Not everyone's work or temperament or career or desire lends themselves to being an activist, and I respect that. So I don't want to compare myself to what other academics do or what other activists do. We're all trying to make a difference in different ways.
So we have time for one last very fitting question here, which is, do you think that...
Actually, I also want to talk a bit more about the whole foreign interference law that's coming.
Yes.
So do you want to do this question and then we talk a bit about that?
We can do that, and then we'll sort of end off there. Okay, so we have time for one last question. Thank you so much for asking the questions. They've been really wonderful, but here's the last one for the day, which is, do you think that education reform is key to combat the PAP's crackdown on dissent? Right, and this is very fitting because New Naratif is nothing but an educative and re-educative platform.
Yeah, sure. Definitely, you have to understand the history of our education system and how it has transformed itself very much into a key part of the PAP's propaganda campaign. The Singapore story was created in the 90s, right? And it wasn't even the first attempt, but it was a response to the fall in percentage of votes under Goh Chok Tong to cement the PAP in people's minds as being equivalent to Singapore and being responsible for all the good things in Singapore. So definitely there's that. But I think there's a lot that's very insidious about educational system, which also needs to be reformed, and which breeds a certain culture and mentality of dependence on the government, and a certain hierarchy ingrained in people's minds, right? An ethnic, linguistic, class hierarchy. There's an article that recently came on New Naratif about meritocracy and really how it's about creating artificial scarcity to justify then that artificial scarcity and deny or give resources selectively to maintain a certain elite hierarchy. So definitely right? Educational reform. But to be honest, that applies to so many things in Singapore, because how the pension system is used to control people, how the medical system is used to control people, how the housing system is used to control people, how the ethnic/racial CMIO system and the whole welfare system is used to control people. All of that needs to have reform. And we can't reform it without freedom of expression, without willingness to debate issues, discuss issues, tackle taboos, slaughter sacred cows. And so for me, that's why my personal quest is freedom of expression and freedom of information, and getting citizens to participate actively in discussions and debates. Because we have to understand no one person has the answer, no one group of people has the answer. We can only come up with things collectively if we want to make a difference. Everyone has to participate. So yes, educational reform, but that is part of a broader whole structural problem with Singapore that we need to collectively tackle.
So we've talked a lot about the charges and the harassment being leveled at PJ Thum against New Naratif. But I think one important thing that we do need to talk about before we end off is where we're headed forward, specifically with the whole foreign intervention situation and the likelihood of a bill being passed in that direction. So PJ, can you tell us more about that?
Okay, so we touched on this earlier just briefly, but I want to reiterate, right, that there is a law coming. Shanmugam said as much in August 2019. Josephine Teo said it this week, that there is a law coming, and it is very clear they're targeting Online Citizen Asia and New Naratif. And they are just trying to figure out how on earth to write a law that will criminalize us, but doesn't criminalize, say, Channel News Asia or Mothership, right? Or make it impossible for BBC and other international media to operate here, right? So that's why when Terry was summoned for questioning by the police for the whole contempt of court thing last March, they actually asked him all these questions about internally, how do you operate, and funding and all of that, right? Which he refused to answer because it's irrelevant. And today when they summoned me, again, they asked me questions about, decision making, internal structure, the sort of content creation process, decision making process, and I refuse to answer because it's irrelevant. But it's quite clear to me, I believe, that they are fishing for information, and if this is actually the police are being used to fish for information, this is a huge abuse of police time, right? Shanmugam himself said our police are overworked, and yet they have time to do this, like forced to do this and come after Terry and myself and other activists. But anyway, but I want to emphasize to Singaporeans to really be aware that this is coming. They are going to try and shut down New Naratif and the Online Citizen Asia. And they're going to come after us, and they're going to try and find a way to do it, if not through this law, through another law. They've already made their intentions clear, and now that the election is over, they have time to act, because the next election will be in a couple of years, and hopefully they'll, what they're hoping is people forget by then. So, yeah, I want to encourage everyone to keep fighting for freedom of expression, right? And when the law is tabled, also write into your local representative and make your opinion known. That is really, really important. Don't ever think that writing into your representative doesn't help. It does help, because they need to know what the mood on the ground is. They want to win elections too, right? And they also need data to justify some of the decisions they make. And sometimes our politicians are well-meaning, they just haven't heard alternative views because they don't get to hear alternative views. So it's really important. Make yourself heard. Take part in discussions. Join New Naratif, right? So once again, I want to encourage everyone. Join New Naratif. Come to our democracy classrooms. It's very easy to join us. Sorry. $52 a year. That's about 70 Sing a year. For a membership, or actually if you can't afford it, just write in sponsorship@newnaratif.com. We'll give you a free membership, and or donate newnaratif.com/donate. We rely very, very much on membership revenue and donations, and so we really need your support if we're going to keep fighting for you. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. So I want to give a final shout out, a final thanks to everybody who tuned in and joined us today with this wonderful interview, and especially to those who liked, shared, and especially those who contributed the wonderful questions that we had a fun time and a very interesting and thought-provoking time answering, right? So please head on over to New Naratif. You can check out their work and join as a member as well. And finally, last and not least, I want to thank PJ for talking to me, for sharing your insights about literally everything, where we are headed, the current situation, how it is on the ground, and I think most of all about how you feel, right, about how this has affected you on a human, personal level. Yeah.
Right. Thanks, Sean. Thank you for taking time out of your day also to come here and host this. Really appreciate it.
Oh, yeah.
And I want to thank all of you who joined us, listening in, watching on Facebook Live, for your questions and for taking the time to join me. And especially to all of you for your solidarity and support today. Really appreciate it. It really, really helps. You know, I don't think I can understate how much it helps to know when I'm alone in there with the police, to know that there are hundreds or thousands of people out there who are making a huge clamor and standing up for freedom of expression. So I'm very grateful to all of you, and of course to my team at New Naratif, wonderful group of people whom I couldn't do this without. So thank you to all of them too.
So remember to hashtag I'm with PJ Thum, and with that, we'll see you next time.